Alright guys, this is going to take you through Season 1, Episode 1 of Friends, which is the supporting text for if you are doing sitcoms for Component 2. So we start off then with the opening credits, and as those opening credits come to a close, the characters turn out the lamp. I'm not going to go through the whole introductory credits as a whole. It does give us some indication of the characters, but we're going to get those repeated as we go throughout, so you don't necessarily need to know that straight away. One thing that you do need to know is that the theme tune itself was created by the two people who you see in that left-hand shot at the moment. So David Crane and Marta Kaufman created that iconic theme tune that then became a sort of single in and of itself. So as these credits come to a close and the characters turn out the lamp, they're all settled on the sofa about to watch the show. So this mimics the actions of the demographic because we're settled on our sofas ready to watch this show as well. Now the music used in the opening setting is taken from the theme tune. It's also a way of positioning the setting as something that's important, because as we go from setting to setting, we're going to get that same theme tune bar or two repeated. Now the Central Park Cafe places the show within New York, and it sort of shows, or it's a play on words given that the cafe must be in or around Central Park. This is a recognisable location around the world, so even if we're unfamiliar with America as a whole, we know whereabouts this is set. We then have an establishing shot of the characters themselves, used to show them together and their unity, and this provides a sense of warmth because they're relatable. It's also something that's really easy for both passive and active audiences to consume. Now details about the characters' personalities start to come through, which is again why I didn't break down the title sequence as a whole. So Joey's clearly portrayed as a stereotypical male character and a stereotypically masculine character, given that he's dressed all in black. His dress codes and the fact that he's sitting backwards on his chair also show the level of confidence that he has. Now the coffee shop location is really interesting actually, and it's a really unique setting in that it allows a lot of different camera shots from a variety of different angles. The fact that we get all these different angles makes us feel more involved because we're not just viewing static characters. It's almost like we're sitting inside the coffee shop as all this is happening. Now going back to the different character representations, Chandler's displayed as kind of easygoing and laid back from the way that he's positioned on the sofa. His dress codes also indicate the sort of cultural context that's going on here because they're very reminiscent and stereotypical of the 90s, which is when this show was produced, the first episode being aired in 1994. Phoebe, on the other hand, is represented as being more childish. Now, it's important to note that at the time of this first episode, all of the characters are meant to be in their early 20s, but Phoebe seems far younger than this, and that might be through the fact that her hair is in pigtails, which is something we normally associate with children, but it could also be the fact that she's sitting on the floor in a coffee shop and also making a sort of origami finger game, which again displays her innocent persona and also the fact that she's more creative. She's also shown as being very spiritual because when Ross comes in, she starts to pick sort of details out of his aura. Now this wasn't common at the time, so it's kind of interesting that we get these two characters together and the fact that they're friends when they appear on the surface to be so different. And because from the minute Ross has entered, it's clear that he's way more uptight than the others. He's in dark clothing, which sort of mimics his point of view here and shows the level of formality that he has. Now another camera angle that we get here, which is used throughout the series as a whole, not just in this opening section, is where we can see past the sofa itself to the actual door of the coffee shop. Now this not only allows us to view the main protagonist, but we can also see what's going on outside. So this wide shot acts as a way of sort of giving us a little bit of setting as well as keeping the characters as part of our main focus. Now Rachel enters through this door and she provides humour instantly through the fact that she's in a wedding dress, which is completely out of character for a coffee shop, and so it gives us a sense of enigma and mystery right away. Some of that mystery is wrapped up when it becomes clear that Monica and Rachel are old friends, so the audience know that she's going to become a significant character, particularly moving on because this is the first piece of action we've got within this opening episode. Double entendres are used throughout the show, so here Ross's umbrella springing open could connote his sexual desire for her, or could be a reference to sort of premature ejaculation. Either way, the beginning of their relationship is shown right at this first episode and is something that spans all 10 seasons. The actual narrative of Ross and Rachel really isn't wrapped up until the final episode in season 10, so we get that little sort of hint of foreshadowing here that isn't wrapped up for like another 10 years. Now, despite feeling sympathy for Rachel earlier on, we start to feel a little bit of animosity towards her when we see how she behaves. The fact that she's treating Ross like a slave and he's almost acting in that manner indicates not only his submissive personality but Rachel's dominant one, and this shows a significant shift in gender representation, which was again very unusual for the time. Now, as mentioned previously, we've got a change of scene, we've got another establishing shot to show where we are now at the block of flats, but also, again, those recognisable bars from the theme tune, which show us that this is going to be a significant setting, and obviously it's where the characters live. Now, Monica appears to be living in what is, I would imagine, a penthouse apartment, and we can tell that from the sort of slanted windows that we see in the background, which allows them to get out sort of onto the roof. Now, there are also multiple rooms to the apartment, which, although this is very reminiscent of the 90s, is not totally believable because this would cost an absolute fortune, even in the 90s. So for early 20-year-olds, not particularly likely. But the characters are all watching television, which is something that we can relate to. Now, the show that they're watching is a Spanish show called Tres Destinos, and despite the show being in Spanish, the characters are all fully engaged. They are portraying an active audience through their social commentary, and they respond in similar ways to we respond as an audience when we're watching Friends. Now, the characters sort of stop and turn around when they hear Rachel talk, which shows that they're not only an active audience in the shows that are on the television in the apartment, but they're also an active audience to Rachel's drama. And again, this makes them relatable to the audience because it matches what's going on with us as we're watching the show. Now, the dominant personality that we've seen from Rachel quickly changes when she's being threatened with being cut off from her fortune, and this sort of stereotypes her as a rich kid and also shows more of her spoilt personality. Now, the men are seen making sandwiches a little later on, so again stereotypically associated with their gender, and it also provides humour because they're not actually in their own apartment, they're in Monica's apartment. So on the one hand it shows that they're close as friends, but it could also show that the men are kind of freeloader types or have that sort of freeloader personality. The women, on the other hand, again show stereotypical traits of the gender because they're normally associated with emotions and sort of caring and nurturing, and although Phoebe adds comic relief through her singing, the women are all together trying to help Rachel. Now, in a similar camera shot to what we've got in the centre, Joey then shows more of his personality because he begins to hit on Rachel. And this shows his recognisable "how you doing" catchphrase right at the beginning. It also presents the character trope of the womanizer because Joey's going to have lots of sort of short relationships throughout the whole of these 10 series. The decor in Monica's apartment shows mixed taste, so parts of the apartment are very formal, which we can see through the poster in this shot, but it's also very lively, which we can see through the high key lighting and also the very bright colour. There's quirky elements as well, such as the picture frame around the peephole. So all in all, we get a very sort of, again, warm atmosphere and a little bit more of a quirky atmosphere. Now, the facial expressions and body language that we see of the characters here reveal more about their personalities. So Monica is surprised and taken off guard when the other characters are shocked by her date, and the conversation matches what sort of conversations we would have in day-to-day life when they refer to Paul by his profession, Paul the wine guy, which might be how we refer to people within our own lives. Now, when Paul is actually introduced, the way that he appears is kind of awkward. His hands are in his pockets, so he's got very closed body language. And this could be sort of a recognisable situation because it's always sort of awkward when you're meeting friends or family of the person who you're dating. So it's a way of the audience to relate to what's going on. Now, as the camera sort of pans around, the rest of the friends are stood in a line, and they're sort of stood in line according to the awkwardness that they each portray. So characters such as Chandler add to the humour with their quips and remarks, whereas Rachel is sort of standing on her own. Interestingly, Chandler's sort of quick remarks place him in the character trope of a wisecracker. Now the location changes to Ross's apartment, which is clearly more sparse and bland compared to Monica's, and this adds to his personality because it's almost like he's being deliberately isolated to make us feel more sympathy towards him. Also interesting to note that in a YouGov survey, Ross was the least liked friend out of the whole group. So this might be a sort of a way of setting that up. Now the demographic are let into the dramatic irony when we see Joey and Chandler together. They hide pieces of furniture, which not only provides us with a laugh, but is also relatable to the demographic because flat pack furniture comes with this idea that it's meant to be indecipherable and incredibly hard to put together. Now, despite the fact that Ross's ex-wife is represented in a negative way because she's sort of put into this position of a stereotypical butch lesbian, it's actually very brave of the show to portray a same-sex relationship because it really wasn't all that accepted in 1994. So it sort of shows how ahead of its time Friends was at this point. Most of the scene transitions that we've got are through fades. So here Monica and Paul are at a restaurant. Now the decor further dates the programme as it would have been very high class at the time to go to a restaurant like this, but obviously it doesn't look high class to a modern audience. And it's also worthwhile noting that we've got a series of contrasts beginning here. So Monica and Paul are on a date, and then that's sort of contrast to Rachel, who's on her own on the phone, and initially we're sympathetic and empathetic with her because we understand that she's having a difficult conversation with the man she's just left at the altar, but we've got no idea that actually she's leaving multiple voice messages for him. Now again, further contrast, Rachel on her own, and we've got Ross with friends. Chandler seems to have become more relaxed, possibly under the influence of beer. His cap is now turned backwards, which means it makes him seem more down to earth and laid back. We also have different kinds of humour included within the show as well. So we've got slapstick humour, which is created through Monica spitting out her drink. It's a traditional form of comedy, slapstick humour, so again provides a sense of cultural context because it's could be considered kind of old, but it's also a way of indicating, a subgenre as well. Now, Friends has a habit of, as we said, lining up these contrasting scenes. So we've gone from Ross, who's kind of miserable, he's with his friends, but he's still kind of miserable, to Monica, who's having a great time on a date. Monica is with someone, and then we're going to see Rachel on her own as well. Friends, interestingly, also has a lot of intertextual references, and it also has a lot of cameo appearances as well. So here they're watching Joni Loves Chachi, which was a very recognisable show for the period. Some of those cameo appearances that have occurred throughout Friends are as significant as Bruce Willis, Brad Pitt, and even Robin Williams all appearing in episodes. Now the close-up shot that we've got of Rachel shows her emotions. The fact that she's still clutching her wedding dress creates further atmosphere and sort of makes us feel very sympathetic towards her, but it could also be placing her in the sort of character position as Miss Havisham in Great Expectations, where she's sort of wondering if she's ever going to be married again or if she's ever going to find that one. And the scene that we've got depicting Ross in the centre is almost a mirror image of what we've got with Rachel. They're both on their own. They both seem isolated. And again, it's another way of foreshadowing that the relationship that they have is going to be cemented by the end of these 10 seasons. And also we've got a layered shot in that final image you can see on the screen here, where the two characters have a sort of fade in and out to make them seem like they're looking at each other through the window. So again, this adds to that romance sort of storyline because it is a very romantic convention to include this. Now the same shot of the building is used each time we pan to the apartment. This shows the change in time, and we've also got that same music from the title sequence being used here as well. Now again, the male characters are over at Monica's apartment, so despite the audience knowing that they live across the hall, they're still sort of freeloading off Monica. Rachel is displayed though as being more positive now, so we see her outside of that wedding dress starting to take on a personality of her own. Now Chandler is more formally dressed, indicating that he does have a job, whereas Joey is not only not dressed for work, so indicating that he doesn't have a stereotypical job, but also further emphasised as a womanizer through the fact that we're emphasising his physique here. Now, the modern audience is not necessarily going to equate what he's wearing to handsome, but back in the time that this was produced, he would be dressed as someone who would be considered perhaps attractive, or sort of like a bad boy type persona that would be very attractive to a female audience. Now Chandler and Joey move in sync to dispose their coffee, which creates humour. We can tell that through the laugh track in the background, but it also indicates not only their closeness but Rachel's social awkwardness. She seemingly can't perform simple tasks such as making coffee. As Monica appears through her door, which we can see in the centre frame, the walls appear inside of her room to be pink, which again represents her as being stereotypically feminine, but importantly she seems kind of hesitant. And that's when we sort of realise that she's hesitant because all of her friends are here, and that creates this enigma. Why is she nervous? What's going to happen? And it's the fact that Paul is still in the apartment as well. So as Paul appears, the enigma is wrapped up. The shots, again, very common to sitcoms and romance as a whole, because this is sort of portraying the morning after the night before. But it could also, again, reflect the time and the period that this was produced, because this is showing in a very subtle way what happened between Monica and Paul the previous evening. Now the group moved the table to get a better view of Monica and Paul, so again this plays into that slapstick comedy, which we could class as a subgenre here. It also shows that nosiness is something which is applicable to friendship groups as a whole, and again this is something that perhaps we as a demographic can relate to. We also get an over-the-shoulder shot combined with a point of view angle, because we as the audience feel like we're looking at Monica and Paul, but we're sort of also looking over Monica's shoulder. So again, this makes this entire show more personal, because it feels like we're actually in the apartment with the friends. Now the camera zooms out to give a wide angle, which you can see as the final shot on this screen. This gives us the emotions and body language of all of the characters here. So we can see the way that the friends are curious about Monica, but we can also see how happy she is. Chandler makes fun of Joey's career as he leaves, but he does so in a way that's not overly hurtful or cruel, and this shows his carefree personality through the way that he's happy to make fun of himself just as much as he is Joey. Now, Rachel, who's not spent a lot of time around the friends, looks kind of amused by what's happening, and this may reflect the way that we as an audience feel, given that this is the opening episode, and we obviously wouldn't have spent a lot of time with the friends before now either. There's also an element of relatability, because we might well have been the person who's been sort of the odd one out within the friendship group before. As Monica and Rachel sit down together, though, we get some more contrast. Monica is happy, very well put together, but Rachel's dress codes signify that her personal life is a mess. Their conversation also represents what's stereotypical within the friendship group, because we see their very close bond, and also the fact that it's sort of the women talking together rather than men confiding in each other. We get a new establishing shot to show where Monica works. It also adds character development, because we start to learn more about Monica, despite the fact that this is only the first episode. We then have supporting characters, and the supporting characters are going to make up a large part of the narratives within the 10 seasons. Some supporting characters, such as Gunther, are going to become more iconic in themselves, whereas other supporting characters are going to come and go throughout the 10 seasons. Monica's personality, again, further developed. We see that she's got a creative side, and she's not just the person who's in control. We also see that she's kind of insecure and is, in a way, very fragile, because when we see that close-up shot on the right-hand side, we can see that she's been hurt, and this is a way of gaining sympathy for her, particularly given that it's a first episode, and it could indicate that this is a sort of a common convention of the show as a whole, because we would expect sitcoms to revolve around relationships and gossip, both of which we've got here. To take away from the fact that what we've had previously is very sort of emotional and has been designed to create a lot of sympathy for the characters, we then have comic relief. So this takes away from the seriousness of the situation, and it's also important that Joey's the person who's giving this comic relief, because he's the stereotypical womanizer, as we've seen before, so it's likely that he's used similar lines and similar ploys himself. Now, his body posture and his dress codes are very similar to the Fonz, who starred in a show called Happy Days, and that would have had a very similar demographic. So we can see how Friends at the time had competitors, despite the fact that today it's probably one of the most recognisable sitcoms of all time. Now, despite the fact that Phoebe was viewed earlier as being kind of a flaky character, Monica gives into her strangeness without hesitation. So this not only provides humour for the demographic, but we can see how Monica and Phoebe are close themselves, even though Monica and Rachel appear to have that very close friendship bond. Rachel, again, stereotyped when she walks in through the door carrying loads of shopping. So again, a typical representation not only of women but also somebody who's of an upper class and also somebody from New York. Now this puts her out of place with the rest of the friends who are more down to earth. She enters the coffee shop in a very similar way to how she did at the beginning as well. Based off what we've just seen then, the extreme close-up with the credit cards and the scissors shows the extent of Rachel's spending, but also the seriousness of what is about to happen. The centre shot represents the closeness of the group, really cements the friendship that we've got as the title of the show as a whole, as well as anchoring the show as a whole, because this tells us that these guys are going to be protagonists for future narratives and they're all going to be supporting each other. There's nothing happening at the minute that is likely to put an audience off. It's all just very nice comment, and I know nice isn't really a great word, but it is just a very nice, easygoing sitcom to watch. Now, Rachel's expressions in that final shot show how lost and isolated she is because she doesn't have a money or a family to rely on. Also makes her more realistic and relatable now, so we've not got this barrier between her and us. Also indicates she's got a lot of growing up to do. Now later in the same episode, further details of the characters are indicated. The close bond between Monica and Ross, who are brother and sister, is evident, and also represents another family trait, another narrative trait, which is family values and issues. Monica leaves, but she stamps on Paul's watch, which links back to the earlier narrative when he claimed that his ex-wife had done the same thing. So it's a way of Monica getting closure and a way of the narrative coming to a close as well, and is perhaps a point at which the audience would celebrate. We're then left with Ross and Rachel. So Ross reveals backstory between him and Rachel, which again cements this subplot even further. And as he leaves, his final line is, "I just grabbed a spoon." Now this is referring to something that Joey had told him earlier in the episode, and this is something that the active audience are likely to pick up on. It's also a way of making Ross more of a relatable character, and a character who becomes more popular as the seasons go on, because he's not bringing the tone of the sitcom down, or the atmosphere of the sitcom down. A final scene is shown when the credits roll. We see the group in the same position they were in when they started, so this particular episode has got a circular narrative, but we end the show with dramatic irony. Rachel has not understood why the group were asking if she'd made the coffee, despite the fact that the audience saw right at the beginning that she really can't make coffee to save her life. So it's kind of ironic that she's ended up working not only at a coffee shop, but also at the place where she first entered as well. Hopefully you found that useful. We've got quite a few key terms here, so what would be really useful is if you could take a small section of the show, screenshot it, break it down, and then try and use these key terms to give additional detail. If you've got any questions or concerns about anything I've done today, put them in the comments section below, or get in touch with me through Twitter at media_revision. Please subscribe, hit the button below, and if you hit the little bell icon next to it, you get instant notifications every time I post a new video. And I'll see you guys later for another video.